I was a police officer until a prisoner called me by the name of my dead brother. There are things no one should hear. There are names that, when return, bring the dead with them. In that cell, under the cold, flickering light of the police station, I heard my personal hell gain a voice. "Sends his regards." 4 words, and it was as if an axe had split my life in two. My stomach turned instantly. The taste of bile rose dry and hot. I froze on the clipboard. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The noise of the fan disappeared. The conversations around me became distant. It was as there was only that man, the cold concrete of the cell, and my head trying in vain to understand what was happening. Lucas was dead. He'd been dead for almost 8 years. No one there knew his name, not the newbies, not the veterans, and especially not this prisoner. My brothers had not left my mouth for years. I had killed him inside me so I could move on, and now he was back, on the dirty lips of a stranger. A tone of someone who knew exactly where he was poking. I looked into his eyes. He was smiling, a calm, almost satisfied smile. As if he had been for this, as if he was part of something bigger, and in that look there was something impossible. Something that shouldn't be. He knew things that weren't even in the reports, things that not even I had the courage to remember. Since that I haven't slept well. When I close my eyes, everything comes back. The smell of wet asphalt, the metallic taste of the night I received, the muffled sound of sirens in the background, the body lying on the ground, and the question that left me alone: why was my brother there? What did he know? Why was the case closed so quickly? I tried to forget. I tried to it all with him. But now it seems the truth has decided to find me, dressed as a prisoner with a crooked smile, and the name of my dead on my lips. And that's how I was pulled back in, without choice, without preparation. Just swallowed by memories I'd fought whole life to keep buried. And when the pain gave way, the rest of the story began to bleed again. Some people to be police officers because they believe in justice. Others because they grew up with a military father and a grandfather who was an officer, not me. I became a police officer because it was the only way silence the feeling of impotence that had been eating away at me since I was a teenager. The for me was never a symbol of authority. It was armor, defense. A desperate attempt to convince myself that if I were in the right place at the time, no one else I loved would die like that. But no matter how you wear a uniform, the past still manages to tear at your skin from the inside. When I joined the force, I was 22, and a rage that aged me inside. It wasn't blind rage, the kind that explodes. It was a cold, subtle rage. That made me wake up before my alarm train until I vomited, memorize every page of the penal code as if I were preparing to face something, Shinzi, that didn't yet have a name. At the police station, they called dry. They thought it was because of my quiet demeanor and short answers, but it was just that. I didn't allow myself the space to. Everyone there had a nickname, a funny story, a nickname given to me by a partner in the patrol car, not me. And the more I worked, the further away I got from the memories that still burned in the back of my throat. His name was Lucas. He was 3 younger than me, but he seemed older in his manner. He was the kind of person who laughed with his whole body, who knew everyone's name in the neighborhood, who played the guitar even though his fingers were crooked from a bike accident. He was the kind of person didn't expect to lose, especially not like that. It was a Saturday night. I had just been accepted into the academy. Because we went out to celebrate, me, him, and 2 other friends. We stayed up late, drinking bad beer in a bar hidden behind the municipal. When I got home, it was already dawn. My mother was asleep. He had stayed a little longer, and he would walk back. The town was small. No one expected what happened. His body was found the next day, thrown on the banks of the river that runs the southern zone. His face was bruised. His hands were cut. He had no wallet, no cell phone, no dignity. Report mentioned an accidental fall, possible drunkenness, assaults consistent with the terrain. No suspects, no real investigation, no effort. Mother's pain wasn't like in the movies. She didn't scream, she didn't faint, she didn't break anything. She sat on the kitchen floor, holding the shirt they gave her at the morgue, and stayed there for hours, breathing deeply, as if she was trying to hold the world together with her lungs. And I could only stare at the wall. The same wall where he scribbled dates in, counting down the days until my birthday. At the seventh-day Mass, one of the city investigators came to his condolences. He said, "Unfortunately, these things happen." I wanted to punch him, but I just clenched until it hurt. It was that week that I decided I was going to join the police force, not for justice, but for revenge. Even if it was a small one, of finding a loophole, a clue, someone who knew more than they were saying. For a long time, I held out hope one day someone would slip up, that some record would fall with the right name, some face would appear on a forgotten camera, some criminal would open his mouth to brag and mention my brother by accident. But the years passed, the pain became routine, and the anger became inside me, keeping me standing. I never told anyone on the force about this. To them, I was the focused, methodical cop who left a case open, and it was true I didn't. Because each unsolved case was like another Lucas that someone buried without answers. Difference is that I saw his face in everybody I found, and that killed me a little every time. There were times, during the early hours of morning on duty, when I would look at the old files, sliding my fingers through the pages as if searching for something I even name. I would look for dates, places, patterns, but all I found was silence. Same silence that came after the funeral, the same silence that filled my mother's house for months, until she decided to take his photos off the wall, pretend that it would help. One time, I tried to go to the place where they found the body. It was a bend, where the grass was already beginning to swallow the sidewalk. It was raining. I stood there, with my hands in my pockets, feeling my get heavy with water and the cold rising up my legs. I looked at the river for a while. I thought about everything that had gone, and I wondered, as I did almost every week, if he had time to feel afraid before he died, if he screamed. He thought about me. These kinds of questions stick. They eat away at you. You try to live, work, date, laugh about something, but they come back. Always come back. Sometimes, when I'm lying down, ready to sleep, my mind plays tricks on me. I start to remember his laugh, and suddenly, it turns a scream. It turns into the sound of a body being thrown. It turns into the dull sound of what could be a punch, a blow, or the end of overtime. I learned to hide it, to suck it up, to say it's okay like a mantra, and no one notices. Because the pain hidden behind A is different. Society expects you to hold on tight, but I've never been whole, not on day one, not now. That's why, in that moment in the cell, when that man said his name, I couldn't react like a police officer. My breath left me as if someone had me in the chest, because what he ripped from me in that moment wasn't just a memory. It was the lie I'd been myself for years, that I was over it, that it was in the past, that Lucas was where he belonged, at peace. But now I sure of anything anymore. What if he wasn't? What if someone made a point of keeping me away from the truth? What if his death wasn't a mistake, but part of something they never wanted me to find out? What would you do it in my place? It was hot that night. It was a muggy, dirty kind of heat that clung to your skin like old guilt, the kind of heat you feel in a police station hallway, where the air never works properly, and the smell of stale coffee mixes with sweat, damp paper, and something rotten that no one else notices. I had on duty for hours. The broken clock on the wall said it was 15 minutes to midnight, but I knew it was much later. My shoulders ached. I tightened, and all I wanted was silence. The radio crackled with that annoying hiss, and the operator's voice came next, emotionless. Unit 2, detained in Plaza Vella. Disturbance of order, no identification, on the way. I sighed. The kind of incident that shows up just to fill out a report. Crazy people too broken to fit in anywhere else. I wrote it down on paper without thinking, almost automatically. I had already dealt this hundreds of times, but for some reason that I would only understand later, that simple record seemed heavier than it should been. 20 minutes later, the police van arrived. 2 guards got out without rushing and opened the door. The prisoner was silent, thin, pale, with his hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. He walked slowly, as if his feet didn't belong to his body. There was something strange in his eyes. It fear nor anger. It was familiarity, as if someone already knew the place, as if he was expecting it. They put him in the cell at the back. The one in the row, the one that was usually empty. The lights in the hallway flickered 3 times as the door closed. Nothing new. Old wiring. Old everything there seemed to be slowly falling apart, but still something bothered me. I stood in the doorway, watching him sit on the concrete, his hands clasped in his lap as if he were praying or waiting. I went back to my desk and pulled out the form. No fingerprints recognized, no records in the system. It was as if he didn't exist. The hastily filled out form simply said, male. Between 30 and years old, calm, silent demeanor, fixed gaze. That's right, stare. Strange that they put this in writing, but I would understand later. I typed the report. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Uneasiness. The kind of feeling that starts in the back of your neck, then runs down your and tightens your stomach. It was subtle but persistent. I got up, grabbed the radio, and asked the technician to activate the in the cells. I wanted to watch him from a distance, but when the image came on the screen, all I saw was noise, hiss, cameras out. The ones in the hallway were working. The ones in reception were working too. Only the ones in his cell were. Must be interference, the technician said. The system might have crashed. But I've seen plenty of crashes. And of them seemed so selective. I decided to go there myself. The hallway was darker than before. The lights flickered slowly. As if they were, the sound of my footsteps echoed strangely, deeper, slower. When I stopped in front of the cell, he was already standing in front of his face, pressed against the bars. "Good evening," I said. He didn't answer. "Do you have a name?" I asked. His were fixed on mine, pupils dilated, skin almost translucent. His voice was low, hoarse, as if it had been silent for decades. "Lucas, you're still waiting for you." I can't explain what happened to me at that moment. My entire body froze. Time slowed down, as if someone had the police station in a vat of thick oil. I felt cold sweat run down the side of my face, slipping down my shirt. My hands began to, not out of fear, but out of a kind of pain that has no name. "How do you know that?" I muttered, more to myself than to him. But it wasn't a human smile. It wasn't provocation. It was pity, like someone looking at someone who hasn't yet understood the obvious. "There's something that needs to be said," he replied, turning his back and walking back to the bench. I stood there for seconds that felt like years. Mind was spinning. This couldn't be happening. No one, absolutely no one, knew that Lucas was my brother. Not here, not on that shift. And even if did know, why this man? Why now? I went back to the monitoring room. I demanded that the cameras be reconfigured. The technician insisted there was no technical problem. But when the images returned, what we saw was impossible. He was not in the cell. At least, in the way he should have been. The image showed the empty bench. Nothing, just emptiness. But when I went over there, he was still sitting, staring the wall, as if he were in 2 places at once. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't go home. I kept reviewing his file, trying to pull any from the system. Nothing. I called the fingerprint department. No results. I called the expert in the early hours of the morning. Took new photos. We redid the procedures. Everything came back blank. His file was a blank draft, a present body with an absent story. I went back to cell once more. I brought him coffee, as if trying to humanize an interrogation. He took the cup, thanked me with a slight nod. and said he didn't rest because you never asked what really happened. What exactly are you talking about? I asked. You know, you always knew, just didn't want to see it. My vision blurred. That man was touching something I had kept locked away for years. But the most unbearable thing wasn't he said, it was what he didn't say. The pauses, the looks, the gestures. It was as if he knew not only Lucas, but guilt I had been hiding since that night. I stood there for a while longer, in silence. And as time slipped through the musty walls of the police station, the only thing I could think was, how did he know? The file, the face, the voice about him seemed designed to get to me. There was no coincidence in that encounter, and deep down, a part of me already knew this wasn't just this was the beginning of something I wasn't ready to discover. But maybe it was already too late. You think this could have actually happened? It wasn't a conscious choice. I didn't wake up the next day and decide to reopen my brother's case. It is that the name Lucas kept echoing inside me like a distant siren, the kind you hear but can't quite place. I spent the entire day trying to the routine, the thin coffee in the kitchen, the pile of reports piling up. The occasional call to break up a bar, everything seemed coated with an opaque film. Nothing felt real, and every time I tried to concentrate, they came back like a stone in my chest. Lucas is still waiting for you. That same night, I waited for the shift to calm down. When most of the agents already left or were sleeping in the corners of the break room, I locked myself in the file room. It was a small, stuffy room, smelled of old paper and mold, and that almost no one had used since everything had been digitized. But I remembered, Lucas's investigation had been done before the online system went live. And I knew that at least some of the documents were still on the file, was thinner than I remembered. A manila envelope with my last name handwritten quick crooked letters. I had to pause for a moment before opening it. My fingers were shaking. Part of me felt like I was making a mistake, that digging this up now, after all this time, would only reopen a hole I'd spent years trying to fill. But damage had already been done. From the moment that man in the cell had said my brother's name, something inside me had snapped. There was no way put it back together. I opened the envelope. The first impact was physical. The smell of faded ink, of old paper, hit me then came the second, the absurdity of it being so shallow. The coroner's report was vague. It mentioned bruises consistent with a fall, mentioned heavy alcohol intake. It mentioned possible involvement in a bar fight, but no toxicology report was attached, no pictures of the scene. Impressions were taken from the scene where the body was found. I leafed through the papers with growing anger. The police report mentioned at most, one from my mother, and one from a fisherman who said he had seen something floating in the river, but had not it. That was it. No neighbors were interviewed. No bar, nothing. It was as if they were in a hurry to close the case, as if the body were just another number. Among the stapled documents, I found a witness I never remembered hearing about, a certain Marcos F. Silva. According to the note, he had been seen leaving the bar with Lucas Knight. He said he had accompanied him part of the way, but there was no transcript of the statement. No, just a line in blue pen. Report inconclusive, missing after initial contact. I closed my eyes. I tried to remember. I was so deep in grief, in that at the time I accepted whatever explanation was given. I never questioned it. I never asked to see the witnesses. But now, as I stared at that of paper, everything screamed that something was wrong. No one disappears like that without a trace, unless someone makes a point deleting them. I took the computer from the records room. I started searching for Marcos F. Silva in the city archives. The name was too common, and the information was scarce. But I found a police report from 3 days after Lucas's death. A woman reported of her son, Marcos Ferreira da Silva, 27 years old, a resident Vila Quatro, known for working as a waiter at the bar in Praça Velha, the same one where we had been that night. Chills ran down my spine. Files said he had last been seen the night Lucas died. My breath came in short gasps. The air in the room seemed thicker, as if the archives themselves I was touching something that should have been left untouched. The sound of the old refrigerator outside creaked, and a second I thought someone had come in. I turned quickly. No one, just the shadow of the fan turning slowly on the wall. I went back to I tried to connect the name to anything. Lawsuits, fines, health records, any activity in the last few years. Zero. It was as if that missing person report, he had been erased. I left the room with a queasy feeling in my stomach. I walked down the hallway like a ghost, oblivious the voices, the footsteps, the noises of the shift. I went to my locker and took a small key from my wallet. A while back, I had saved A of the flash drive with the old case files, just in case. I had never had the courage to open it. That was my capsule of silence. But I needed to hear what she had to say. In the corner of the computer room, I plugged in the device. It took me a few minutes to find what I was for. There was an audio file saved 2 days after the funeral. The file name was Depoimento Bruto 07. The voice was weak, muffled, as if recorded on an old cell phone. A man was speaking nervously. I don't know his name, but he was with the one who died. We left together, but I stopped at the corner. He wanted to go alone. I thought it best to let him. There was A in a light-colored coat waiting near the wall. I saw him. They talked. He seemed tense. I should have stayed, but I didn't want trouble. The recording ended abruptly. My heart was racing. The boy who died was Lucas, and that guy in the light-colored was never mentioned in any of the reports. Why? I closed the file. I sat down. And only then did I realize that mine were cold and sweaty. My fingers were tingling. The fear was no longer about what I would find. It was about what had already made sure to hide. That death was no accident. Someone lied, someone covered up the tracks, and someone disappeared soon. The question now was, why? And what's more, how many people knew? The silence in that cell was not the usual silence it was not the silence of those waiting for an audience, or of those swallowing their pride bars. It was a thicker silence, one that seemed to know, as if the air inside carried something old, something that already happened, and yet was not over. I hadn't slept properly for days. The shadows under my eyes rivaled those in the police station, and the faces of my colleagues began to dissolve into indifferent figures. They greeted, asked if I was okay. "Is everything okay, boss?" And I responded with the same automatic smile, with my head down, already heading to next room where I could rummage, cross-reference data, review notes, open old files that everyone had forgotten about. Everyone. Me. It was on a hot morning, the kind where sweat sticks to you even when you don't make an effort, that I returned to my cell. I don't know what I may be. He had disappeared, or that when he looked at me again that conviction would disappear from his eyes. But no. When he saw, he just smiled, as if he knew I would return. "You shouldn't know what you know," I said before I even approached the bars. "You weren't." He remained seated, arms crossed over his knees, his gaze fixed on me, unblinking. "But I know," he replied without irony. "Without, and you already know too. You just have to let it hurt enough to accept it." I stood with my arms crossed, trying to contain the urge to down that door and rip out answers with my bare hands. But something inside me, something cold, something precise, told me he would speak, and that I needed to listen, even if it cost me more than I wanted to pay. "Lucas didn't die by accident," continued. "You already know that. The scene was cleaned, the body was moved. The forensics team was instructed to the case. The coroner, under pressure. A fall, a fight, a report with sentences that say nothing. But you know was missing there, right?" My heart was pounding in my chest. A buzzing began to fill my left ear, like the hiss of a poorly tuned radio. Knew what he was going to say. I had known since I saw the incomplete file, since I heard the incorrectly recorded audio, since I read the note with name that no one else mentioned. But between knowing and hearing, there is a chasm. Who did this to him? I asked. His eyes for a moment, as if he were searching for the name within himself, not because he had forgotten it, but because it was heavy. It was, the words came out slowly, surgical, and when he said them, something inside me shattered. Ramos, my partner for the season, the man I shared car with for almost a year, the same one who accompanied me to the wake, the one who held my mother by the shoulders when she almost upon seeing the coffin, the same one who told me, during long shifts, we can't save, but at least we bury them with dignity. I felt betrayed by each of those sentences, by every knowing look, every conversation about children, football, retirement, as if it had all been a rehearsal, as if he had occupied that space just to make sure I never in the right place. He was there, the inmate continued. Lucas saw something he shouldn't or said something he didn't like. Maybe he was in the wrong place. Maybe he knew someone he shouldn't have, but was involved. And he knew that if the body was found like that, with the injuries he had, questions would be asked. So you called people who knew how to clean, people who knew how to write the right reports, people who were to protect you and protected themselves. My knees went weak. I stepped away from the cell, leaning against the opposite wall. Shallowly, sweat dripping down my collar, I tried to piece together the fragments, the rushed report, the disappearance of the witness, the calmness of the prisoner, the ghost file. Everything pointed to this, everything, and yet the part of me that still believed in injustice, in the damned structure I swore to follow, refused to accept it. "Why are you telling me this now?" asked, without looking at him. "Because he's still waiting for you," he replied, his voice lower, more human. "And now, you're ready to listen." I was silent for a long time. The distant sound of a motorcycle passing by outside came through the walls. Along the pop of a pipe dripping in some neighboring room, the world went on, time went on, but inside me something had stopped. Or rather, something returned. "You weren't supposed to know that," I repeated, more to myself than to him. "I know what I have been given to know," said, "and you know what you must do now." That sentence stuck in my head like a nail. I left the cell saying anything else. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat. I just sat at my desk, surrounded by papers, folders, and echoes. And I to remember, of looks, of random phrases, of suspicious silences. I remembered the night Ramos told me he'd seen Lucas at the bar, but that he had been too drunk to notice anything strange. I remembered how he'd looked away when I'd asked if he'd heard anything on the radio that night. I remembered the way he'd avoided the subject whenever my brother's death up. And then one particular memory emerged, like a body that refused to sink. Text he'd sent me 2 days before the tragedy. Something silly. "Are you out with your brother tonight? Keep an eye on him." I'd thought it was a joke, that it was a protective partner thing to do. But what did he know that night? And why didn't I see it? Could it be that the worst mistake we can make is trusting the wrong people? You do it differently. I didn't go straight to his house. I spent 2 nights circling the decision like someone circling an abyss, knowing that once I too deeply, there would be no going back. I spent the hours of the morning searching through old files, forgotten memories, anything that could give me the slightest bit of security about what was about to do, but there was nothing. What I had were pieces of a puzzle that made sense when placed on the same table where Ramos and I ate our lunch during the night shift. Everything to him, and yet a part of me still wanted to be wrong. On the 3rd night, I went, without a uniform, without a weapon. Just with the on my shoulders and the accumulated pain of almost a decade, trying not to see what was in front of me the whole time. The house was the low-slung 2-story house in Jardim Planalto, with a crooked gate and the porch light always on. It smelled of clean laundry and too old to name. I knocked my knuckles once. The door opened seconds later, as if he had already known I was coming. It was different. Thinner, his hair was almost all white, his expression marked by time or the weight of what he was carrying. He wore a faded flannel, open to the second button. He looked at me as if he were facing a past that had finally taken its toll. "It's late." "Uh-huh," he tried to keep his tone casual. "I need to talk to you." He made room without asking anything else. We sat in the kitchen. The same metal with cracked upholstery, the table with a plastic tablecloth stained with coffee. For a moment, everything seemed too familiar. I could see myself there years ago, laughing at some random story while drinking the worst coffee in town. But the memory split in half when I looked his eyes, because there was no friendship there anymore, just unresolved history. "It's about Lucas." He didn't move, he didn't even blink, but his fingers began to drum lightly on the table. "You know he's never left my mind," he avoiding my gaze. "Then why did you lie?" Silence. "Why did you let me bury him with a lie? Why did you make me it was an accident?" "Because you needed peace," he said, almost in a whisper. I slammed my hand on the table, hard. The empty shook. "Don't put that on me. Tell the truth. Tell me what you did to my brother." The tension was thick. It could be cut with a dull knife. Finally looked up and met my gaze. "He found out," he said, "what we were hiding." "What were you hiding?" "That seizure from 2015. The diverted, the missing evidence, the two guys who disappeared. That wasn't just a mistake, you know. There were big people behind it. And Lucas saw, I don't know how or why, but he came to me, he asked, he wanted to report it. My breath caught. I remembered that operation. That something never added up, that documents went missing, that the boss at the time asked for secrecy for the good of the corporation. But I thought Lucas would have been involved. He was just my little, he shouldn't have been in that shit. "You killed him," I said. "It wasn't a question." Ramos lowered his head. "I wasn't the one hit him. I called the guys. I asked them to just scare him. It was just to intimidate him, that's all. But he fought back. He tried run away. One of them got carried away. And when I saw it, it was too late. I got up from my chair. He did too. We stood face to face. Men full of history, tiredness, guilt. My clenched fists shook. I wanted to break him right there, end it all. But my body was paralyzed by pain, by frustration of realizing that none of it was fiction. It was the truth. And it was rotten. The body was moved, he continued. They took it to the cuts, the position. Everything was faked, even the report. A friend of mine tampered with it, in exchange for silence. And lived with this all this time. I didn't live with it, I rotted with it. Do you think I slept peacefully? You, my mother, bury her own son, knowing everything. I know. You let me become a cop trying to bring justice, the death you helped cause. He cried, but it didn't move me. "Not what do you want now, forgiveness?" I spat in disgust. "No, I want it to end. It will end." Anger rose like wildfire, but with it came worse, emptiness. The realization that no amount of screaming, no amount of punching, no amount of arresting someone was going to back what he had taken. Lucas was dead, and all that was left was a body left in a ravine. A brother alive in guilt, and a scoundrel in a uniform who shook my hand and said he was sorry. I left the house without another word. I crossed the broken man, because that was what I was. For the first time I knew the truth, but instead of relief, what came was a raw pain. That tears from within, because now there was no more doubt, no more chance, no more comfortable silence. There was only the truth. Her rot, and certainty that from that moment on, everything would change, because when the truth bleeds, it never goes back to sleep. I could have killed right there, in that stuffy kitchen between the coffee-stained tablecloth and the warm smell of rotten regret, but I didn't. What I had left, I got up, turned on the radio in my pocket, and in a voice that didn't even sound like mine, I called for backup. I used the right code, the right tone, because above all I was still a cop, even with my stomach on fire, even with my heart crumbling, and Ramos didn't resist. He didn't even try. When his colleagues arrived, he just looked at me and nodded. as if the sentence he had been waiting for years. I put on the handcuffs myself, coldly, without ceremony, without a word. And he didn't say, he just lowered his eyes, as if he knew that any attempt at explanation would be spat back in his face. As they loaded him into the police car, I looked up at the sky. It was cloudy, moonless. And there, standing on the curb, with the engine and the radio blaring in the background, I felt the weight of it all come over me like a wave. I had arrested the man responsible for Brother's death. I had finally torn apart the lie that had been choking me for almost a decade. But instead of what came was emptiness, a kind of cold that no jacket could hold back. I went back to the police station with him. As they crossed everyone stopped. Their eyes said what no one dared. What did this guy do? But no one asked. I ordered the officers to leave at the back free, the same one where days before that other one was, the cell where it all began. Ramos entered resistance. I sat down at my desk, my hands still throbbing with tension, and began the register. Letter by letter, name. Registration, informal confession, accusation. But something inside me itched, something whispered beneath my conscience. The same cell. I stood up. I know what brought me there. Maybe it was the need to close the cycle. Maybe it was just the morbid curiosity that arises when you feel that is still breathing in the cracks of history. The cell door was closed. Ramos was head down like any other prisoner, but it was only when I turned around in the hallway that the question hit me hard. And the other? I ran the monitoring room. I asked for the footage from the previous week, the night the first prisoner, the one with no record, no identity. No said my brother's name. The screen loaded. I asked to go straight to the moment the man was put in the cell. But what I saw didn't make sense. Not only did he not appear in the images, but the cell was empty the whole time. All the other cameras worked perfectly. I saw the colleagues, the suspect in. I saw the movement in the hallways. I saw the exact time I stopped in of the bars and spoke to him. But in the images, I was talking to the void. My throat closed up. I felt the blood from my face. I went back frame by frame, pausing, trying to find a blur, a reflection, a hint of a technical error. Nothing. It was never occupied. I ran back to the records. I reviewed the report. The form was there, handwritten by myself. But the name, I'd left it blank. System marked unidentified inmate. But there had been no check-in. No checkout, no digital trace. My heart was beating like a wild drum. Each step the hallway sounded hollow, denser, longer. When I reached the cell, I saw Ramos inside, still with his head down, as if he was waiting for, "Have you seen him?" I asked. He looked up slowly, blinked, frowned. "Who?" "The man who was here, in his cell. Days before." Shook his head, slowly. "This cell has been empty since last month. No one used it after water leaked from the ceiling. We isolated it, I remember. I was here." My skin went cold. It can't be. I went back to the table. I picked up my notebook. The one where I write down even the things that don't make it into the report. There was a page marked with a crooked line, and there, scribbled in A, was the name Lucas, in shaky letters, as if I had written in an earthquake. I closed my eyes. A high-pitched buzzing sound filled me for a few seconds. I leaned on the edge of the table. I tried to find logic. I tried to rationalize. Cameras fail. Records can disappear. The mind can play tricks. But my instincts told me otherwise. That man was never alive. Maybe it was just of my guilt, a delusion of an obsessed brother. But how did he know? How did he mention details that only someone who was there know? How did he lead me, step by step, to the truth? Maybe he was just a messenger. My brother has not been able to rest until now because the truth had no name. And now it does. Ramos is in jail. The case has been opened. The charge has been filed. But no part of me feels like this is over. Not yet. There are nights when I still feel the same cold in the cell. As if he was again. As if he expected something more. The station felt emptier after that, or so it seemed. The hallways still had the same peeling, the bitter smell of twice-brewed coffee and old sweat embedded in the furniture. But something had changed. Sound of my footsteps no longer echoed with the same weight. Maybe it was because I had finally stopped walking in circles. Lucas's case was reopened on a grey morning. I took the report to the Internal Affairs Department with steady, unshakable hands. Ramos's name was on cover in bold letters. Below it was the title I never thought I would read out loud: Qualified Homicide with Procedural Fraud. The delegate read the document silently, sentence by sentence, as if he knew he couldn't miss anything. When he was finished, he simply signed it and it back to me with a nod. It's official now. It took weeks for everything to be processed. The press tried to make a fuss. It was too late. The case was old. The city had other tragedies to deal with, but that didn't matter. I didn't want headlines. I didn't want justice. I wanted the truth. I wanted a clear name, and that's what I got. Lucas was removed from the list of accidental deaths. The was redone based on the evidence recovered. The audio, the testimony cross-referenced with data from the time, Ramos's financial trail, and most the deafening silence of the witnesses, who now, with time and distance, decided to speak out. When the new certificate arrived, signed, stamped, the word fall, I stood there staring at it for several minutes. It was just a piece of paper, but it weighed like a soul. I took it to my mother, was sitting on the sofa in the living room, as she did every afternoon, wrapped in a blanket even though it wasn't cold. Her eyes no longer had the sparkle as before, but they still recognized me. When I handed her the envelope, she didn't ask anything. She just slid her over the flap, delicately as if touching an old wound. She read it slowly. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell. She closed and pressed it against her chest and whispered something that I barely heard. "Thank you for bringing him back." And in that moment, that peace does not come with the arrest of the guilty party, nor with the signature on the paper. Peace comes when the truth is allowed to exist. A name previously buried under doubt and silence can finally breathe. After that, I never saw that man again. The one in the cell, not in dreams, in the hallways, not in the cameras, which now curiously worked perfectly. I tried to search for his details one last time, as if part of me still some explanation. I searched everything I could, no records, no inputs, no outputs. It was as if it had just been a crack in the world, through which the truth had managed to slip. Whether that man was real or not, I will never know. But I know my brother's has finally been cleared, and for the first time I heard silence, the kind of silence that doesn't suffocate, the kind that seals a story. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up with the feeling that someone is watching me from the door, and for a moment, I think I'll hear that whisper again. He's still waiting for a new. Do you believe that truth rests, or just changes shape? If this story made feel something, even if it was just a chill, a memory, or that strange feeling that there are things we never fully understand, it did its job. Sometimes, all we need is to hear something that makes us at silence differently. Now, if this touched you in any way, imagine how many other people can also with this story. By clicking like and subscribing to the channel, you are part this. You help this experience reach those who may be carrying an unspoken name, a truth poorly told. Comment the word below silence. Show that you stayed until the end and that you understood what that ending really meant. And now, just look at that's appearing on the screen. If you thought this story was intense, the next one will take you even deeper, with a that starts in the most ordinary way possible, but ends where no one expects it. Believe me, there are that not even time can bury. I'll meet you there.